Hi, everybody. Today's Wednesday, July 2nd, 2025, and our friend Professor Marandi is back with us. Welcome back, Professor.
Thank you very much for having me, Nima. Always a pleasure.
Let's get started with what's going on in Iran. And you've shared a photo, a map that shows many airplanes are coming to Israel. And it seems that you suggested that they may be preparing for an attack on Iran. Your take on what's going on, and what is, in your opinion, what is the perception on the part of the Iranians in terms of what's going on in Israel?
It's difficult to say what will happen, but when we look at the history of the Israeli regime, it's not one of uh, keeping promises or oaths or ceasefires. We see right now in Lebanon, they are murdering Lebanese citizens literally almost on a daily basis. The guarantors, meaning these Western governments, they do nothing about it. Western media is silent about it because they're all with the Israelis. In Gaza, we saw that the ceasefire, which Trump negotiated effectively through Witkoff on the eve of his presidency, he himself tore it apart, and Netanyahu restarted the Holocaust with a even greater intensity than before, as we're seeing over the past few weeks. They're literally taking people to places to gun them down, and they're doing things that you can only think of you know uh, in Hollywood movies where they have like utterly evil people. That's they're that open about their evilness. So, and also since they effectively lost the first round of fighting. There's no doubt about it. Uh, the West can try to portray it in whatever way they like, but at the end of the day, despite the blitzkrieg attack and the slaughter of innocents and the targeting of officials and scientists and academics, uh, at the end of the day, they were the ones who sought a ceasefire, not Iran. Iran did not ask anyone for anything. No, Iran did not negotiate with anyone. Iran received a message, and ultimately Iran said, if after this hour uh, there's no more shooting, then we will stop. And Iran kept firing missiles and drones until the very last moment. And the Israelis stopped 2, 3 hours before the halt of hostilities. It wasn't a ceasefire. The Iranians do not consider it to be a ceasefire. There were no negotiations. Iran did not negotiate. So when Trump and Netanyahu are seeking a ceasefire, that means they didn't get the better side. They didn't win the war, because if they were winning, why would they even want a ceasefire? They could just finish the job. They can continue until they have absolute victory. And as Trump puts it, what was it? Um, what was it? Total
Total
surrender or something like that.
obliteration.
No, he said you have to surrender, like
Yeah, unconditional surrender.
unconditional surrender. Yeah. So, why not do it then? Because they lost, and if it had, and we know that people like um, um, people who are close to Trump and people who are in the know, and Trump himself, he said that the Israeli regime took a battering at the end, and we went over this last time as well, and so it's clear. But so that's why the Israeli regime feels humiliated. And but also I think that the more important thing though is that Netanyahu needs crisis. He needs to continue this crisis. And his fanatical right wing allies want crisis. They want war. That's why the war in Lebanon began, and that's why we continue to be in the situation where we are, where this Holocaust is going after going on after 21 months. It's because Netanyahu needs uh, the crisis to go on in order for self-preservation. Now, in order to preserve his own position. Now, I have my own reading on Trump's social media posts, Truth Social, where he spoke about Netanyahu and the judiciary. I haven't heard this from anyone, and it may be completely wrong, and it may be absolutely ridiculous, and maybe some others have said it. I haven't followed this issue that much, but I was thinking that maybe the reason why Trump wants the judiciary in Israel and the opposition to Netanyahu to leave him alone, this great hero and so on, is because Trump knows that if this the his judicial problems end, then maybe he will be less provocative, Netanyahu. Maybe he will not feel as much a need to continue expanding wars as he does now. Though there are many who know better, you can ask them and they may say this is utter nonsense. But I thought that maybe this may have something to do with it, that Trump doesn't want this to continue, not because he's a good guy, but because he probably understands this is not going to end well. And so he wants perhaps the opposition, the judiciary, and the Israeli regime to leave Netanyahu alone, and then maybe Netanyahu would behave a bit differently and there would be less provocation and the less likelihood for a second round of fighting. Because if Nima, if there is a second round, I'm quite confident that Iran is going to be much more uh, heavy-handed than the first time around. And Iran is not going to be caught off guard like it was. It wasn't a complete surprise to Iran, by the way, because some keep saying that Iran was. The Americans did try to deceive Iran, but I know for a fact that Iran was expecting an attack. They didn't know when, but there was that expectation. And as I said, I do not believe there will be a war with the United States. I don't think that's possible. I never thought that. But we've discussed this before, the war between Iran and the Israelis, that clashes, airstrikes and that sort of thing, that is possible. But a land invasion where the United States gets into actual war with Iran and troops on the ground, I just think it's not possible. But it's not as if the Iranians didn't know. But even if you're waiting for an attack, uh, when the Russians and the Ukrainians fight each other, they're looking for opportunities. So if one of them suddenly carries out, remember when the Ukrainians uh, launched a major operation into Russia and they gained a significant foothold. Despite the fact that the war had been going on for almost 3 years, they were able to do that. These things happen. And in the case of Iran, the Israelis, their capabilities are much greater than that of Ukraine. Zelensky couldn't dream of having the weapons that Netanyahu had. It's just they would never give it to him. So Netanyahu had everything he wanted, and he carried out an attack, and he scored a success in the first few hours, uh, assassinating senior people in the military and that sort of thing. But ultimately, Iran got the upper hand. So I believe that maybe Trump does not want this to continue. But if Netanyahu stays in power, I think that it's almost inevitable.
I think what you mentioned, Professor Marandi, is totally, to me, makes sense because when Donald Trump came to power, he had someone in Israel called Netanyahu who said they destroyed everything in Iran. They're prepared to do the final job, to put an end to Iran. And with the we know that they've been preparing for this attack for years. And when they suggested that to Donald Trump and suggested that we already destroyed their defense system, all of those rhetorics on their part, and we need to go there and put an end to it. It's just a final moment for them. And as you've mentioned, it seems that Trump would be happy with a defeated Netanyahu, with someone who was defeated in a weaker position, if you think of it, and why he needs to change Netanyahu if he can get whatever he wants from Netanyahu. I don't know if we can somehow believe that Donald Trump, because he's right now he's pushing for ceasefire, a 60-day ceasefire with Gazans, with Palestinians. Do you find it somehow related to the behavior? And he said recently in a video, he said that Netanyahu is coming here. We're going to talk about the victory, this enormous victory we had uh, on Iran. And when I look at the situation, these pieces are not fitting to each other. It's somehow there has to be something behind the scene, because this exaggeration on the part of Trump that we are handling everything. Do you think that if that's the case, as you've mentioned, one of the possibilities, by the way, we're not saying that it's going to be absolute. What would be the outcome of this sort of behavior? Are we going to see the United States capable of finally dealing with Netanyahu the way they couldn't do it before?
I don't know if Trump has a strategy at all. I don't think he does. I think that it's the people around him who have a lot of control. His inner circle, they are very different than the MAGA people who are right now largely on the outside. If you compare, for example, what Tucker Carlson is saying, or Candace Owens, or even Steve Bannon. Uh, Bannon, he obviously knows a lot. Uh, Before the U.S. airstrike, he basically said it's going to happen, and he was the one who said that Netanyahu was in deep trouble. Israel was in deep trouble, and that's why the U.S. saved them. And Bannon was, the closest person to Trump during the first few months of the presidency until things fell apart, like with uh, Musk right now, how they were close and once upon a time and things. So I don't see Trump as being very stable. I don't see him being very normal. I don't think he has a strategy. I think the people around him probably are in a lot of control about what he's. But I do feel that he possibly thinks through that social media post, that Truth Social statement, that if Netanyahu feels secure in his position as the prime minister, that possibly this would alleviate the tensions, and that would be good for the United States. I think that the people in the know recognize that the United States cannot win a war against Iran. That's just a fact. They would not win. And it would be devastating for the world. It would be devastating for Iran. It would be devastating for everyone, but the United States would lose. And when Tucker Carlson actually tweeted that, I'm pretty sure that he spoke to people in the military and people who do these things for a living, these games, military, these games that they carry out in the military to test or to sort of guess how things will play out in a conflict situation. I'm pretty sure they told him, the people who know told him that it's not going to go well for the United States. But I don't see Trump as having any form of strategy. And in the fact that Trump is so sensitive about Iran statements, about Ayatollah Khamenei statements, about Iran saying that we won, and the fact that he reacts so strangely, and he keeps, putting up new posts, and he keeps saying things, and he seems so ridiculous, is itself a sign, I think, that he knows he lost, that he did not get the upper hand against Iran. The fact that he has to have some celebration with this monster Netanyahu, I think, shows that he doesn't feel. Why would you need to have a celebration as a genocide is being carried out, as this Holocaust continues to be carried out? If you really are that confident, you just move on. But he doesn't feel that way, and so uh, again, I think that they could strike tonight, they could strike tomorrow, but I have no doubt that they will not be able to catch Iran off guard, and Iran is preparing itself. Uh, the Israelis gave they put out everything they had. That their air force, their the people that they had cultivated, and other Western intelligence agencies had cultivated in Iran. Many of them ISIS people, Al Qaeda people, um, others who joined as mercenaries, extremist Takfiri people, other and many of them are refugees in Iran. Iran had in comparison to the Iranian population of roughly 90 million, Iran has the highest number of refugees in the world. It's the most refugee-friendly country in the world. I'm not saying it's ideal and that everything is perfect, but as a sanctioned country, to accept so many refugees is quite extraordinary. But a lot of them are unregistered or illegals, depending on what terminology people like to use. And now Iran is going to deal with those who are unregistered or illegal very differently. And they're arresting lots of people who were involved. And the security agencies are now focused on this, and people across the country are helping with this. People are calling the police if they see a car on the street with a taxi driver came to our apartment building, and then the person who wanted to enter the car, he asked that person why I wish it been quicker. He said because his windows were dark, and he said that people were looking out from their windows at the car. They were concerned about why is this car with dark windows in the street. People are that sensitive now. So the intelligence agencies, of course, things are getting much more normal. Things are everyone in Tehran, they're moving around. It's business as usual. Gradually, it's getting normal. But you drive on the streets, there are no police officers anywhere. But in any case, the intelligence agencies are dealing with that. So they won't have that network like they did on day one. They use all their technology and capabilities. Iran now has learned how to deal with that. And Iran has to protect itself better. Now Iran is preparing itself and its capabilities, which much of which have not been used, most of which have not been used, for round two. So I have no doubt that the advantage lies with Iran. If the Israeli regime initiates a second round, it would not look good for them. They could probably hit some places, but they would again be seen as the international community as the problem, uh, and that would draw countries closer to Iran even further. If Iran strikes first, you know, it's not going to look good in Tel Aviv. But even if the Israeli regime strikes first, Iran is going to hit much harder this time around. And I think it's going to have irreparable consequences for the Israeli regime. So Netanyahu he's destroying Israel, as I've been saying for the last 21 months. He is he is the worst thing that's ever happened to Israel, and he's destroying it day by day, piece by piece. We see even now um, at concerts, people are chanting death to the Israeli armed forces, and people are chanting along with them. The mood across the world is moving in the direction uh, which is the worst possible scenario for Israel. And that's why when Iran fired missiles into Palestine, across the world, people were celebrating. And across the region, people were celebrating. So Netanyahu is dragging the regime down, but I do think that I think he will probably push for war. I think that Trump probably does not want another round based upon what I said. That's my personal analysis, which may be completely crazy. But I think that truth social post was directed at the opposition and the judiciary to make Netanyahu feel more confident and less likely to escalate.
Here is what Reuters reported that the United States was seriously concerned about a potential blockade of Strait of Hormuz during the conflict. If a country is so much concerned about a blockade to be implemented on the Strait of Hormuz, how they can even think of having a bigger war with Iran. I think that that could somehow. You've mentioned the way that Israel attacked Iran, and is there any new game, any sort of a strategic target that they couldn't hit, that somehow they tried everything, in my opinion, to do damage to nuclear facilities, but they were not the way that they could hit, but they were somehow exaggerating the success on their part. And what else can they bring, in your opinion, to this scene in order to put, because they're so desperate to have some sort of leverage when it comes to the negotiation, to talks, with whatever we can put on the table to go forward with the United States. What else they can bring to this scene in order to make some sort of leverage for the United States? Is there anything, in your opinion?
No, not really, because all Iranian key assets, as I said before, are deep underground. The Israelis were not able to destroy a single underground missile base or drone base. Uh, and they were able to strike a number of launchers. Most of the strikes were decoy. They hit decoys. So, if you recall, they showed a few F-14 sort of lying around, and they were all excited about it. It was clear as day that these were all decoys. So most of what they did was actually target decoys, but they did have some success on a handful of launchers, and both before the missile, uh, mostly I think after the missile was fired. I'm not quite sure right now, but I think mostly it was after the missiles were fired. They had some successes, but very limited. And so Iran's, underground military capabilities are secure, and that's because Iran was preparing itself not for Israel, but for the United States. Ever since Iraq and Afghanistan, the occupation of these two countries, Iran was preparing itself for an American attack, which would be infinitely more devastating than anything that Tel Aviv can do. So I don't see that the Israelis can really destroy. They destroyed things, but the key, and increasingly after this, the Iranians are going to use their new experiences to uh, move things around, protect things better, have new types of air defenses, and to create better security so that infiltrators cannot use drones. I mean, things will change, but I don't see that. I don't. I mean, Nima, when the war started on day one, that was the first day was the worst day because they had struck, they were killing people, and Iran hadn't responded for hours. We didn't see the missiles come in for a number of hours. Never once did I see a single person say that the country is going to fall apart. Never once did I see a person think that the country is doomed. Not for a second. They were just angry and say, "Well, why aren't we striking back? Why aren't we doing this? Why did we allow this to?" That was the sort of thing that people were discussing. No one was saying we're in trouble. So, and then when the missiles began to go and they were fired in literally hours after this blitzkrieg attack, then people began to feel better, and over 2 or 3 days, the tide began to turn, and gradually we saw that the Israeli regime was hurting, and they had to bring in the Americans. It still didn't do anything for them. So Iran is much stronger than the West likes to think. They've always been portraying Iran as a house of cards. That it's about all you have to do is push it over. Okay, well this wasn't a push. This was a punch in the face. It was whatever. Didn't do anything. It rallied the whole country. In fact, all those people, those young people that Western Persian language media were trying to work on and to turn them against the government, and for years, the Woman Life Freedom color revolution was not about Mahsa Amini. It was about this segment of society, a significant segment of the youth in particular, who thought that Iran was stubborn, that Iran was not willing to compromise with the West, and that if we'd just been more reasonable, life would be better and Iran would be Switzerland. I was saying to someone just today that I don't even know if Switzerland's all that great anymore. But in any case, that's what that was what many of these young people were saying, and that's what BBC Persian and all these hundreds of media outlets that they have in the West that are on. You know how huge this industry is, and it's unique. No other country in the world has such a thing, such a vast media working against it. So you have all these many thousands of mercenaries working for the West and promoting. Well, the West, the Israel, what they did was they destroyed this whole narrative. We saw immediately after the war, people were saying that the leader was right. Ayatollah Khamenei was right. My old students would contact me and say he was right. People, you hear this all over the place. There was a sea change in mentality in the country because everyone saw that we were at the and this was a very smart move, by the way. Some were criticizing Ayatollah Khamenei for saying we should negotiate, and some were criticizing and saying we should not negotiate. But he made the smartest move. He decided to indirectly negotiate so that Trump didn't get his way because Trump wanted direct negotiations. Trump wanted the negotiations to be in the Emirates, the top servant of Washington. Ayatollah Khamenei said Oman. Why? Because he wants to say not what he was saying, not the way you want. So he took the middle ground. And while the negotiations were taking place, we saw the US position shift and gradually and then harden. And it was clear that we were moving towards confrontation. Again, not war like in an invasion of Iran, that's out of the question, but conflict, airstrikes or something. So what happened? When it turned out that the Americans were conspiring against Iran, young people in Iran who were many, many young people who were brainwashed, and older people, some older people who were brainwashed, they suddenly opened their eyes and said, how can we negotiate with these people? Especially when the liberal media in the West was the same as the conservative media. No one was criticizing the Trump. They were all attacking Iran. CNN was talking about sleeper cells in the United States, demonizing Iranians there, just so that they could justify aggression, war, and murder in Iran. You know how the Western media works. There's no difference between any of these different factions when it comes to countries like it. They may hate Trump when on local issues, but when it comes to Iran, and people saw this. People in Iran saw the duplicity. They saw that as they were striking nuclear sites that were under IAEA supervision, the European countries in the West were supporting the strikes, which could hypothetically create contamination and kill all sorts of people. That woke people up. That destroyed the worldview of many of these young people. And they became much more realistic. And Ayatollah Khamenei, who was always a popular figure, his popularity went through the roof. So did this work for the United States? Ayatollah Khamenei has spoken 3 times since the war began. As he always does, he's not a person who speaks every day. How many times has Trump posted about Iran over the past couple of weeks? Or spoke about it like a madman. So obviously, I think it shows that Iran is in a commanding position. And by the way, one other thing, someone today asked me about Iran has the sort of like is in the worst position. It has a nuclear program, but it doesn't want to make a bomb. And I said, actually, it's the other way around. Iran is in the best position possible now. The best position. Why? Because the West has forced Iran to suspend cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency. Now Iran can do whatever it wants, and no one will know. And Iran didn't. If Iran did this on its own 6 months ago, a year ago, people would have said Iran is being provocative. If Iran had refused to negotiate indirectly, they would have said, well, if Iran had negotiated, maybe this could have been avoided. So the West, through its own stupidity, Trump, through his own foolishness, made the world and the Iranians and turn against the United States. Most Iranians were, but that segment of society that was influenced by the West, turned against the West in the United States, and then now Iranians are demanding that Iran leaves the IAEA. There's no divide in Iran. They're saying, of course you should leave. And even countries like Russia, we see they're saying Iran has the right to do so. The IAEA is spying on Iran. So now Iran can suspend cooperation with IAEA. They don't have to go back anytime soon because they've set conditions that will be very difficult for this organization to meet. So we have ambiguity and much more protection. Iran can enrich uranium in 50 different sites across the country. And they can make centrifuges. We don't know how much damage there was. If we accept American intelligence agencies, then it didn't go well for Trump. But all that aside, Iran built those sites. They're not huge sites. It's not industrial level enrichment. The site in Esfahan and Fordo and Natanz, they're not industrial level. Iran purchases its nuclear energy, its nuclear fuel from Russia for its nuclear power plant. And the other power plants will also have such agreements. The reason why Iran has always wanted to enrich uranium is that one day if the United States imposes an embargo, that we are capable of producing our fuel. You know this as well as I. That is what Iran does in all areas of economy because it's sanctioned. People, when they say that Russia has industrialized after the war, that's exactly what's happened to Iran before Russia began this. In Iran, almost all goods in Iran that you purchase are Iranian, or at least parts of them are Iranian. Why? Because after the sanctions, the Iranians began to move towards local and indigenous production. And this is a part of that broader policy. So Iran has the scientists. They murdered a few scientists and their families and their neighbors. The Western media doesn't seem to have a problem with that. They call them precision attack, just justifying slaughter, as they do in Gaza and Lebanon and elsewhere. But Iran has thousands of scientists. Iran has the industrial capacity because that's how all the centrifuges and these centers were built. They're not huge centers. Iran can continue this elsewhere, wherever it wants, and we're not answerable to the International Atomic Energy Agency. So now Iran, in my opinion, is in a commanding position. They've cut off the hand of the International Atomic Energy Agency, and no one can complain about it because Iran had every right to do so. And people know that.
Not only with the situation with IAEA, I would argue Iran has never thought about attacking Israel and destroying the way that they have destroyed these strategic targets in Israel. This, Professor Marandi, it's somehow so similar to what has happened in Ukraine. Russia was, before the conflict started, Russia was somehow trying to do everything to negotiate with the West. And we are getting to the point that Russia is somehow putting the terms on the table and you have to accept. I see the situation with the Iranian nuclear program is going to the same direction. They're going to attack you. They're going to attack Iranian facilities, whatever they can do to Iran. But after all, they have to understand with the situation, as you mentioned with IAEA, with the attack, if Israeli attacks comes again to Iran and Iran going to respond harder than before, I don't see that the situation going to change for the West. Do you think that this time they're going to learn from what has happened in Ukraine or from what has happened between Iran and Israel, which we know, by the way, Israeli media is talking about the ceasefire and the way that it happened, it helped Israel because Israel was on the path of total destruction if the war continued the way that was that has been going on for 12 days. 12 days, it's nothing. Look at what has happened in Ukraine. For more than 3 years of fighting, we're getting to 4 years of the conflict. How Israel can sustain that?
No, I don't think the West has any plans to change. I mean the political establishment. Although change ultimately will be forced upon them, I think. I think that we're heading towards a situation globally, economically, where things are going to get much more difficult for the West. Things are not, there are lots of things happening. But one thing I wanted to add, and then I want to continue with the point that you made, is that the West also did this to a so-called reformist president. If this was President Raisi, they could have, used this false narrative that the hardliners are there and we cannot work with them. This was the guy who they said would be, reformist and Western leaning. I don't see President Pezeshkian as a pro-Western person, but I don't want to get into that debate. But I mean, no, I don't. I mean, I don't want to because I know some of your people online are very hostile. I mean, some people are very hostile towards him. I don't see him that way at all. But in any case, he is supposedly a reformist and so on. When they attack Iran in this way with a government that is a reformist government, as they say, even though I don't even know what reformist means and I don't know what principlist and conservative means because it's very fluid. But they only made it worse for themselves. They only made it worse for themselves. But um, I don't think the West is going to change. But the world is changing, and people in the West are changing. And as I said, at, uh, someone chants death to the IDF, and the crowd at the concert chants with him. And now they want to have an inquiry or an inquiry about that instead of you know having an inquiry about the companies that are helping the British companies that are helping with the Holocaust in Gaza. They want to target this heroic, young, brave singer who is against genocide. This is the world sees this. The change will ultimately be imposed on the West, but the West is too corrupt. The elites are too morally bankrupt to be able to change course. So I don't think that I don't think that Iran will let its guard down. But another thing, Ima, things have changed so much that if tonight Iran attacked the Israeli regime, except for the West and the Western elites, do you think anyone in the world is going to criticize Iran? People will be celebrating. If Iran right now fired 200, 300 missiles into Israel, no one would be upset. Nowhere. In the West, they'd be outraged and whatever. But no one would blame Iran. So what the Israeli regime has done is it's put Iran in a commanding position where Iran is seen as the good guy across the world, as the hope for the Palestinian people across the region, and no one else, because everyone else is complicit. They're training, they have direct flights, they uh, have embassies, they're all working with the Israeli regime. They're all complicit in the genocide. All these regional countries, so all of them are in one form or another with Israelis. Their countries are the bases in their countries are being used by the Americans to help the Israelis offensively and defensively. The bases are used to bomb Yemen. Everyone sees Iran as the only all the propaganda against Iran for the last 45 years gone out the window. Both Western propaganda and propaganda by these oil and gas rich dictatorships who've been promoting sectarianism, religious hatred, racial hatred through all their very huge media apparatus and their cultural centers and religious centers and their Wahhabi and Salafi centers and so on and so forth. All of that has been swept away. So I don't want to say that we didn't suffer losses. It was a blow. It's painful. It angers people that we had so many people killed, children, families, entire apartment buildings, people wiped out. But they've united the country. They've made the world more supportive of Iran. They've shown the hypocrisy of other countries that are doing nothing for the Palestinian people. They've made the Israeli regime look much uglier. And now Iran's nuclear program, I call it what you may, may call it a strategic ambiguity. But in any case, the IAEA is no longer present. And if Iran strikes the Israeli regime tomorrow, I'm not saying it will, but the world is not going to blame Iran. So who has the upper hand here? And the Persian Gulf. Iran has not used any of its capabilities. And closing the Strait of Hormuz, hypothetically, would be the smallest problem for the West. Because it's not just the Strait of Hormuz. A lot of the oil that goes across the Arabian Peninsula, that would come to an end. Or the Caucasus, or West Asia in general, there'd be no more oil. From Azerbaijan to the Red Sea, no more oil or gas. The facilities could be destroyed, the tankers could be destroyed, the pipelines could be destroyed. It would go far beyond that. So if we get into that sort of situation with the Americans, the Strait of Hormuz would be the smallest of their problems. So I think that Trump is in a bind, and that's why I think probably the sane people, not the Israeli firsters, but sane people probably in the military and the American firsters who are sort of unhappy right now, they're probably hoping that he'll uh, not be foolish enough. And that's why I think that maybe the Truth Social post meant something different than what some people were saying. Again, I may be completely wrong. I have no claim that that is the correct analysis.
Professor Mandy, you mentioned those people who believe that we can negotiate with the United States, and actually, I'm one of them that the negotiation we have always should negotiate with anybody in terms of these superpowers. Israel, except Israel, that the Iran doesn't recognize the state of Israel. All these countries that Iran recognizes should not talk and negotiate with. But when it comes to, we know that we have people like Jawad Zarif, who has been trying so for many years to talk with Americans, to try to clarify the situation with Iranian foreign policy. But after all, when we see that when they're talking with Iranian, they're behind the scene, they're preparing for an attack that we haven't seen since the war between Iran and Iraq. It was something big, in my opinion. And we how is that going to influence those people in Iran who are part of Jawad Zarif, and I'm naming him because he was part of the administration in Iran, and how is that going to influence these people in Iran who were somehow trying to convince the public opinion in Iran that we can negotiate with the West? It seems that the United States is weakening anybody in Iran that who believes that we can get something through negotiations.
Well, I usually try to refrain from um, discussing internal Iranian politics because I'm not on anyone's side in particular. And I've never been a part of any administration. And I liked Dr. Raisi and I like Dr. Pezeshkian, but I don't have anything to do with either. I never had anything to do with the previous administration, in substance, and I helped them in my own way as an individual. I hope through my very personal contribution to media or online, like with you. I don't make money out of this sort of thing. And the same is true now. I generally try to defend the Islamic Republic, the axis of resistance, the Palestinian resistance, in my own small way. And I don't really get too much involved in internal politics. And I really don't know what Dr. Zay thinks at the moment
Yeah.
about the situation. Maybe he believes that now is not the time to negotiate anymore. And by the way, Iran has not decided to negotiate. Remember, Trump said, I think last week, that we're going to negotiate with Iran next week. Iran has not made any decision to do anything. So we shouldn't take anything that the United States or the US leaders or Western leaders say as as true. They're constantly making things up. But I personally am not in principle. I'm not saying right now we should negotiate. Probably right now we shouldn't for the time being. I, we're not right now. But in general, if we negotiate in a way, not necessarily to reach an agreement, but to show that we're open to agreement, that's better than negotiating for an agreement. In other words, if you're going to the negotiating table with the intention of getting an agreement, that's probably not a good thing. If you're going to the negotiating table to see if the other side is reasonable enough to move in the direction of an agreement, that is probably the better that is probably the better way forward. In other words, you're going there just to see what the other side is willing to say and willing to do, and then think about it. But if you're going to negotiate selling your apartment or your car or your bicycle or whatever it is, and you have the intention of selling it, then you're probably going to accept um, conditions that are not ideal. But if you go and see, well, let's see what he's going to offer, and that's it, then you'll probably be able to ultimately get a much better deal. If you're going to buy a house or buy a car, sell a house, or buy a bicycle, or whatever. I think that this is the position that ever since the Rouhani administration has ended, this is the position that Iran has taken. And I think that President Rouhani is probably more, and again, I don't like getting too into Iranian politics, but when it comes to President Rouhani, I'll be more open about it. I think President Rouhani was more to blame than anyone else for the weak approach that was taken by Iran during his presidency, because he was too eager for a deal. Shouldn't be eager for a deal. You should just be there to see what the other side has to offer and what assurances he's willing to give. That's it. And then if you see an excellent deal or a bargain, then you can move forward with caution, especially when it's the United States. Even if they offer something good, they're probably preparing to stab you in the back. That's how the US works. Remember, Trump was the person who said that when NAFTA was renegotiated under his presidency, that it was a fantastic deal. And then after he came back to power, he said it was the worst, it was the worst thing ever. You can't trust Trump. And that's why I find it very, very difficult to believe that we'll be able to come to any agreement with the United States under Trump. But my issue is that when you're negotiating, you have to negotiate with this mentality. But I think after what Trump did, he's burned his bridges, and not just in Iran, but I think across the world, people are going to deal with the United States much more cautiously. I think he's done more damage to the United States by thinking he's so smart and he deceived Iran. Uh, I think he's done more damage to the United States and himself than he figures.
Before wrapping up, Professor Marandi, what is the policy of Iran toward Azerbaijan? We know Azerbaijani airspace was somehow used by Israelis to attack Iran. What would Iran do with Azerbaijan? Because it's not just about the attack that has happened before, it's about the future and the way that Iran should make these countries to understand. Because when they use Iraq has no air defense system, has no capability to control everything. But Azerbaijan should be more aware of what is happening in its airspace when it comes to Iran. It's a neighbor country. Iran respects them as a country, and they have to respect Iran's sovereignty. What is going on between Iran and Azerbaijan? How Iran is trying to talk with them?
Nima, we discussed this earlier, that in the West, they like to believe that Iran is a house of cards, right? That Iran is weak and vulnerable, and all you have to do is push, and it's all going to fall apart. Did it fall apart? No, it's the exact opposite, as we knew would happen. But the West thought the opposite would happen. Why? Because they're fools. They're ignorant. They listen to these your so-called Iran experts that say to them what they want to hear. They get good money, they get good projects, and then they invite these politicians, give them great honorariums, then they get more funding. Everyone is rich, everyone is happy. But their analysis is idiotic. And if we say anything that is different from that, they call us mouthpieces of a regime or whatever. Aliyev is not a very smart person. And those who think that Azeris in Iran can be played with, they're badly mistaken. Azeris in Iran are more hardcore supporters of the Islamic Republic of Iran than anyone else in this country. And they suffered strikes from the Israeli regime, and they hate the Israeli regime. And Aliyev is an ally of the Israeli regime. So a lot of Azeris in Iran would like Aliyev to go. And a lot of them believe, and I'm just saying this, a lot of them believe that the Republic of Azerbaijan belongs to Iran. And Aliyev is a dictator. His relationship with he would be smart to distance himself from the Israeli regime. But I think that by now turning against Russia, I don't know how far this is going to go, but he's not betting on a winning horse. And some may say, well, there must be something. Well, remember what happened to Georgia when they tried to win a war against Russia. It was over in hours. So I don't know who's push. I'm not following events very closely right now in the Republic of Azerbaijan, but I don't think that Aliyev would survive a 2-day war with the neighbor in the south. I don't think he would survive 2 days. And I think that the people who would more than anyone else like to give him a bloody nose are very close to the border of the Republic of Azerbaijan. So I don't know what's going on with Russia, but it's not going to, doesn't strengthen Aliyev's hands. And I don't think that the bulk of the population in the Republic of Azerbaijan is deeply in love with Israel or with Erdogan's Takfiri troops. So in a dictatorship, things can appear to be one thing on the surface, but underneath a lot of things may be happening. I hope that he behaves differently because Iran is not seeking conflict. I think that Iran has been very good at keeping the peace. Look at how Iran contained the situation in the missiles that Iran fired at Qatar, 6 of them scored direct hits. Contrary to what the Western media they were saying, 6 of them hit their targets. These were old generation Iranian missiles. And they were not from the bases alongside the Persian Gulf region, those that are designed to protect Iran against an American attack or war with the United States. These are the sort of missiles that are for Israel, long-range missiles. They fired them there to send a message. And they got through. They allowed them to see if they can take them out, and they took out, I think, 8 with great difficulty, and the 6th landed. So Iran told the Americans that we will strike your bases wherever they are. That's CENTCOM. That's not even this is the heart of the American presence in the region, in the most sensitive part of the world with all the oil and gas installation. So Iran kept the peace in the Persian Gulf for now, and Iran wants peace in its northern borders as well. But the Republic of Azerbaijan is not inherently a powerful regime. And by surrounding itself with enemies, Aliyev is not doing himself any favors.
Thank you so much, Professor Marandi, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
Thank you very much for having me, Nima.